Hey there everyone, and welcome to more D&D Horror Story Cringe with D&D Doge. In today's episode, we have a tale about a DM that comes out to his friends as a furry, and things don't really go well after. But before we get into that, I gotta ask that if you enjoy what I do here, that you give the video a like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And to possibly help out with your decision on that, here is a Super Simba close-up. Thanks, bud. But with that said, let's get into this story. Furry Outing Kills 2 Campaigns and 2 Friendships by Reddit user OutrageousTonight298. First of all, the cast. Names changed, obviously. Anne, a lovely, bubbly girl, always full of energy and smiles. Tyler, the kind and quiet sort, who loves to see others having fun. Dave, the life of the party, always ready with a joke to lighten the mood. Nick, a real scatterbrain who disarmed everyone with his unintentional boyish antics. And myself as the DM. This story takes place several years ago, when all of us were in our late teens and early 20s. The 5 of us had been playing D&D together since childhood. I must have run dozens of campaigns and one-shots for them. Most of us also played in other groups and with other people. This had lessened somewhat now that we were going to different colleges, but we still saw each other regularly and always had a good time. One night, I was hosting a homebrew campaign which had been running for over a year. It was all fun and laughter, with great roleplay and intense battles. Unfortunately, Anne's character died. Character deaths happened enough, to the point that we were no longer too upset about it. So, after removing farewell scene, Anne promptly jumps into creating a new character. Since it's the end of the session anyway, we all sit around chatting and occasionally helping her out to tie the new character to the existing group. "I'd love to try a tabaxi," Anne announces at one point. Almost instantly, the furry jokes started flying, mostly by Dave. Now, you can guess by our age, we all were raised on the internet. And we all know the less than stellar image the internet paints of furries. The jokes themselves were harmless enough, but they persisted until Anne huffed and paged on through the book. "Fine, never mind," she said with an annoyed look. This irked me, not because of the jokes, but because they made her feel silly about a race she liked, to the point that she didn't want to play that race anymore. I admonished them lightly, but they shrugged it off. I persisted, not satisfied with this casual dismissal, but we were all young and stubborn, so we went back and forth. The argument remained friendly, with exasperated laughter and casual cursing, as friends do. "Why do you even care?" Nick jokingly said at one point. "'Cause I'm a furry," I explained in a bout of frustration, still smiling in this quasi-nonsense argument we're having. This was met with more laughter and dismissal by Dave and Nick. They assumed that obviously this must be a joke, because I'm a fairly buff 6'4" guy with a healthy social life. That did not stroke with their preconceptions. And fair enough, there's nothing about me that would hint at it. I never mentioned it. I have no fursuit or anything else that could have clued them in. Given the reputation of furries, I'd always been a coward about anything that could have been perceived as love for the furry fandom. Honestly, I joked about furries just as much as they did. But now that I had said it out loud, I refused to back down. We continued to argue, but the smiles slowly seeped away, as they could tell that I wasn't joking. The mood just turned awkward. Dave didn't know whether to joke or sneer. Nick was similarly conflicted. Tyler had grown very still, and Anne hurriedly finished her new character, a simple, ordinary human. A few minutes later, everyone started heading home. The next session is a week later, and the group chat is awfully quiet. On Friday, I post a reminder for tomorrow's session, as I always do, but still no answer. The next day, I'm genuinely worried if anyone will show. Fortunately, Anne arrives first, and much to my relief, she is her sparkling self. Everything will be alright after all. When the rest of the boys arrive, there's a brief awkwardness, wherein last week's incident is very much not discussed. Dave doesn't give me a hand, and Tyler seems to have trouble looking me in the eyes. We quickly turn to the game and continue the campaign, but immediately I can feel Dave being off. He's blunt and brief, almost petulant. The others pick up on this and are similarly on edge, and as soon as they encounter the first Beastman NPC, I hear it. Dave leans to Nick, and there's a mumbled furry-related remark and a snicker. Keep in mind, this campaign has been going on for over a year. It's your bog-standard high fantasy homebrew setting. They've encountered plenty of satyrs, minotaurs, beastmen, the whole shebang. Never has this been an issue. Struggling to formulate a proper response, I just plow on, but the next beastman I describe elicits a similar response. Could I have removed these NPCs from this session? Yes, of course. But the players were in a beastman forest to negotiate a truce. They were going to encounter some fur-covered NPCs at some point. After a few more childish whispers and giggles between Dave and Nick, I sighed, thoroughly disheartened, and ended the session there. Only Anne stayed to chat afterwards, and she expressed her sympathy and support. I did not plan a following session, and no one asked. Was this the end of it? Of course not. Where's the second campaign that was killed? Did I confront Dave and Nick? Why didn't Tyler say anything? Find out next time, when I decide to write the rest of this tale. It's kinda messed up for OP's friend to start treating them differently, just because he told them that he was in the furry fandom. Sure, there are the stories out there about people in that fandom that do things that are cringe or downright disgusting, but you get that with anything, and most of the time, you only hear about those occurrences. It's much like when I see a comment stating that someone wants to try tabletop RPGs, but doesn't want to anymore due to all the horror stories. I always tell them that these stories I read on the channel are the outliers, and that the good stories rarely ever get posted. A train wreck is interesting to watch, but nobody is looking up videos of an Amtrak just doing its safe travels 99.9% of the time. Hopefully, this story doesn't get too bad after this, and fortunately, we don't have to wait because OP posted the second part. So let's get into it. RPG Drama After Furry Outing, Part 2. This part introduces two new cast members. Ben, cool-headed and relaxed, nothing gets under his skin. Tom, an endearing smartass, full of confidence and witty remarks. They are, for the most part, just innocent bystanders, as you will see. In the days after the last failed session, I reached out to everyone individually, and I have a few face-to-face conversations. I decided to start with Tyler, as I couldn't get a read on him. He ever so gingerly admitted that furries unnerve him. The masks with the giant eyes creep him out, and I'm fine with that, really. I understand that there's a large uncanny valley aspect to it. People are allowed to have preferences and aversions, and I have no qualms with that whatsoever. I explained to him that I was not suddenly going to show up in a fursuit, and that nothing had changed. He seemed on board with that, and our relation mended a bit. Next up was Nick, but he was dodging me, so I tried Dave instead. We met at my place because it was easier. When he arrived, he was cold and distant, and it only got worse from there. To summarize the train wreck of a conversation, he had formed an extremely nasty image of furries, from which I simply could not dissuade him. All the worst things that the internet had told him about furries, he was now piling onto me. There were some painful remarks, and I still tried to break through to him, stubbornly clinging to our friendship, but he left as unconvinced as he had arrived. Nick continued to avoid me. When I finally catch him on the phone, he simply didn't want to talk about it. Nothing was resolved, but at least it hadn't gotten worse, and I could tell that he'd been talking to Dave as they'd always been close. 2 months passed without any more sessions, and I thoroughly missed my friends and my campaign. I still saw Anne and Tyler in other campaigns we played in, but the others had vanished, so I came up with a plan that, in hindsight, was a dumpster fire waiting to happen. I wanted to invite Dave and Nick to a campaign that I'd run with 2 other friends of mine from the furry community. Enter Ben and Tom. They are some of the funniest, friendliest, and relaxed people you can imagine. I asked them specifically as they were so very, well, normal. Perfect for this plan. I reasoned if they could just play a few sessions together, Dave and Nick would see furries were regular people too. So I reached out to them and explained my intentions. I'm honest and upfront about the other players being furries, and hope that they will just give them a chance. And to my surprise, everyone agreed to play. And a session is planned 3 weeks later. The new campaign takes place in the same homebrew setting, as I figured it would be fun to play some sessions parallel to the earlier campaign, so the stories could intermingle. This would make Dave and Nick feel more at home, as it were. I also wanted to continue the earlier storyline with the Beastmen. This was a gamble, for obvious reasons, but my thinking was that this plan was pointless if I was going to warily avoid anything remotely furry from now on. So, I constructed a storyline of separate peace negotiations taking place along the dwarven borders of the Beastmen realm. I informed everyone about this in advance, and there were no objections. In fact, Dave seemed interested. When he and Nick presented their character sheets, everything looked normal, except for one detail that made me suspicious. We gather at a gaming bar and make introductions. Everyone is neutral and polite, knowing about the drama that lay behind all this. Characters are introduced. Ben and Tom play as 2 humans, strategically chosen so as to not antagonize the others before they had a chance to make an impression. Dave and Nick play as dwarves, and their party has been chosen to meet with the Beastmen elders to negotiate the truce. The first part of the session is traveling to the meeting, and all goes fairly smoothly. The 2 dwarves make the occasional foul comment about Beastmen, but this was true to the lore and characters. They arrive at the meeting, and the negotiations start. A quick side jump. A while ago, I read a story of a group of 40k players gunning down the other half of the players for being furries. I had war flashbacks reading that, cause that's exactly what happened here. In the midst of negotiations, both Dave and Nick announced that they light the dwarven grenades in their backpacks and throw them at the Beastmen elders. This was precisely what I had feared, and sadly expected. When they emailed their character sheets before the game, they had spent the largest part of their budget on dwarven hand grenades. They had covered this somewhat by tying it into their backstories as minors, but I was already suspicious of them. These grenades were homebrew items that deal a modest amount of area damage, but throwing a bag full of them, especially at this low level, was sure to kill almost everyone in that meeting. I am a very lenient DM, and normally I would talk to the players about possible consequences if an action was likely to kill one or more of the players. Of course, deaths would happen if it was logical, but we have always been more about the story than the game mechanics. In this instance, though I had spoken to Ben and Tom beforehand, expressing my suspicions but hoping they would prove unfounded, they were fine with losing their newly made human characters if push came to shove, and insisted the best thing I could do if things went south was to deny them the satisfaction of scrambling to recover the scene. So, when the 2 dwarves threw their grenades, I didn't skip a beat. I describe how the entire gathering turns to face the 2 satchels, hitting the center of the clearing before everything is engulfed in a fiery explosion. The grenades that didn't go off instantly are launched outward, creating a blooming flower of collateral damage. There's death and destruction everywhere. The Beastmen on the outskirts who survived are in utter chaos. I laid on the destruction thickly, just to prove that I wasn't going to be upset about it. I rolled some dice, did enough damage to kill all the players twice over, and ended the session. As I'd agreed with them beforehand, Ben and Tom calmly collect their things, thank me for the time and effort, politely say goodbye to Dave and Nick, and then leave. Perhaps I was setting myself up for failure. Who knows? At the very least, I could have let the Beastmen disarm the negotiators, as common sense would dictate, but I desperately wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt and see if they would actually do it, given the opportunity. At any rate, the three of us sit there a minute longer. Eventually, I speak up and ask, as calmly as I can muster at the time, why they would want to join a campaign, invest time and effort in characters, meet up at the table, all for the sole purpose of sabotaging the game and the DM. The non-reaction to their big twist had mostly deflated them, so they didn't have much to say. After a bit of bickering, Dave gathered his things and left with a snarky remark. Nick also got his things, but he at least had the courtesy to look ashamed. Thus ended the second, very brief campaign. And so, we come to the aftermath. If you've read this far, you deserve some good news. In the end, life moved on. Most of us still stayed in touch, simply because our friend circles greatly overlapped, and Tyler and I still play together in other campaigns. Tyler and I continued on a don't ask, don't tell basis, and it worked out just fine. We soon returned to our pre-drama friendship. Dave was a total loss, unfortunately. I ran into him a few more times at social events, but we never shared more than a casual greeting, and at this point, I haven't seen him in years. Nick was the greatest surprise though. He reached out to me not long after the last incident and apologized. He had followed Dave's lead, but realized that he'd been a poopy head. I easily forgave him, as I'm stupidly loyal to my friends, so he and I also continued to play in different campaigns together. When he ran a homebrew campaign of his own, he gave his setting an island full of beastmen, just in case I wanted to make a furry character. I didn't, but the gesture was so genuine that it moved me. And Tyler and Nick did ultimately play and finish a third campaign around the Beastman threat, made more difficult now that many tribes were up in arms over the death of most of their elders. So there you have it, still a decent happy ending. Friendships are forged by ups and downs, and I feel ours came out stronger in the end, even if I did lose Dave along the way. Well, at least OP had somewhat of a happy ending there, though I do have to say, Dave sounds like a dick. To agree to go to someone's game with the sole purpose of sabotaging the whole thing, just to hurt the person running it, is so freaking childish. And if someone is willing to kill a friendship over something as mundane as someone being in the furry fandom, then I would say that they weren't really much of a friend to begin with. Yeah, on the internet, you hear the worst about certain people and events in that whole thing, but for the most part, they are just normal people that like animal characters as far as I can surmise. I mean, hell, I have two friends that are self-proclaimed furries, and they are some of the most normal, well-adjusted people that I know. Though, they have told me some stories about things that do happen with that fandom, and I do have to say, some of them are pretty out there. So if there's anything to take away from this story, it's this. Don't judge a member of a community based solely on the worst of that community. But that is all we have for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.